So we'll proceed to our last speaker for this session, Professor Domenico Agostini, who is Associate Professor of Ancient History at Tel Aviv University, specializing in the history, religion, literature, and languages of pre-Islamic Iran and their interaction with the Jewish and Mediterranean traditions in antiquity and late antiquity. Professor Agostini served as a teaching fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a visiting professor at the La Sapienza University of Rome. He was a research fellow at the French Institute of Research in Iran and at the Accademia dei Lincei, Rome. He has been the recipient of the Prix Piraste in Persian Studies at the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles Lettres in 2008, and the Polonsky Fellowship for Outstanding Postdoctoral Researchers 2013-17. He was the assistant editor and coordinator of the Middle Persian dictionary project directed by Shaul and founded by the Israel Science Foundation. His latest book with Esthrope is, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Bundahishn, the Zoroastrian Myth of Creation, published by Oxford University Press in 2020. And he will speak on Zoroastrian apocalypse in the late Sasanian period. Please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Perfect. Good morning. Hello, everybody. I would like to thank the Israeli Academy of Science for inviting me, in particular, Professor Gistromsa, to inviting me to commemorate the person of Professor Shaul Shaket, this incredible and distinguished scholar. Few things I would like to say about Shaul. A year has already passed since Shaul's death, and since then I think, and I share the same feeling of Professor De Jong, every time I come to Jerusalem, I feel something is missing. Usually once a year I used to drive to Miriam and Shaul's home, where since my first days in Israel I found friendship, hospitality and comfort. Shaul Shaked was an unparalleled and tremendous scholar, but I know already when I was a student in Rome and started to reading text articles about Zoroastrian religion, but I'm very happy that I could know him as a human being, a true gentleman, kind, supportive, and with a fine sense of humor. I owe him more than a lot. I'm in Israel, I built my life here, also because Shaul. I'm sure that he has passed very easily the Chinvad, the bridge of trial, accompanied by the beautiful maiden representing his good deeds, the Daena, and I'm sure that now he's sitting in the highest sphere of heaven, enjoying his well-deserved rest. May his memory be blessed forever and ever. Account of the Iranian Zoroastrian apocalypse raise problematic literary and religious questions on pseudo and or historical events and characters that seem chronologically misplaced or redundant. Numerous narrative traditions overlapped and underwent continuous reworking, additions and reductions. the texts that contain the apocalyptic accounts related to the dreadful evil events at the end of the millennium of Zoroaster, that is the 10th out of 12 millennia, belong to the 9th and 10th century Pahlavi literature. In particular, chapter 33 of the Bundaizh, the Book of Creation, the Zandi Wahman Yazd, and the Book of Jamasp, though they also contain several earlier materials. Given the late compilation of this text, several scholars in recent years have attempted to relate these accounts to characters and events belonging to a period ranging from the 8th century till at least the 11th century. For example, Gignoux, Tourage-Darrier, Anthony, Grenet, Stark and me, de la Vessière recently, Cereti, and more scholars. Nevertheless, it seems evident that various apocalyptic narrative elements were conceived in the Sasanian period, in the very first decades of the Arab conquest, when apocalyptic expectations and messianic hopes traversed the Near East and the Mediterranean world, as reported in different religious traditions. Today, my paper will try briefly to rediscuss the emergence of Iranian apocalyptic ideas at the end of the Sasanian period through some passages from the aforementioned Pahlavi sources, and through a first tentative comparative approach to be developed in the future. Unfortunately, my project was slowed down, as for many of us, by the pandemic, to some contemporary neighboring literary models. One of the more important apocalyptic figures is no doubt that of Kai Wahram, whose the name is explicitly found in the Bundaizh, Zandi Wahman Yazd, likely as the king of Padishwargar, current Tabarestan, a Caspian region of modern Iran, in the Jamasnamag. This hero shall free Iran Shah from enemies in collaboration with the hero Pishotan, and he will herald the coming of the first savior, a posthumous son of Zoroaster, Ushedar. Karol Zegledi has already tried to identify Kai Wahram with the rebel Sasanian general Wahram Choben. In fact, some historical events surrounding this general seem to fit, more or less, several passages of the aforementioned Pahlavi sources as follow. During the troubled end of the 6th century, Wahram Choben, from the noble Alsacid family of Mihran and a native of Rai, whose apocalyptic geographical location might be represented by the close mythical region of Padishwargar, Tabarestan, as in Jamasnamag 44, is sent to the northeastern borders menaced by both Turks and Hephthalites, like in Bundaizh 33-31. Wahram Choben defeats the Western Turks, conquers Balkh, as in Zandi Wahman Yazd 77, at the Hephthalite territories, and then kills the Kagan of the Turks. These tremendous victories yield an immense war booty, likely the treasure of Frasiab, maybe, as in the Jamasnamag 46. After a minor defeat by the Byzantines in Armenia, Hormizd IV slanders Wahram Choben and makes false accusation against him, which caused the general to rebel. Following the blinding and the deposition of Hormizd IV, the blind and deaf king of Jamasnamag 44, by the nobles, His son, Khosrow II, is crowned in 590. In the same year, Bahram Choben proclaimed himself king. See the title Shah of Padishwargar in Jamasnamag 44, taking the name of Bahram VI, enters the capital Ctesiphon. Since Khosrow II cannot withstand the army of Bahram Choben, he flees that same year to Hierapolis and seeks the help of Emperor Maurice. Exactly 1 year later, like in Bundaizhne 33-32, in 591, he returns to Iran, with Byzantine Armenian troops and defeats the usurper, who is eventually murdered by the Turks in Balkh, which might be identified with the regions of Zavulistan in Jamasnamag. Just a moment. No, it's not. Maybe I put here. No, it's not important. It's not. we have not anything for it. And Zavulistan always in Jamasnamag, Kabulistan in the Bundaizhne, and Indug in the Zandi Wahman Yazd. I think it is relevant to revisit some new data that seems to belong to the account of the rebellion of Bahram Choben and its political and social consequences, perhaps with some apocalyptic flavors. A certain apocalyptic tensions could have pervaded the late Sasanian court, which was likely related to the eschatological historical mission of the cosmological Iranian kingship, as well argued by Richard Payne. A passage of the Shahnameh reports a harsh and intense dialogue between Bahram Choben and Khosrow II that seems to hint at an apocalyptic aspect. After accusing Khosrow II of responsibility for Hormizd IV's death, Bahram Choben lays claim to the throne as a member of a Parthian family and restorer of Arsacid rule. He seeks to move the power from Fars, the cradle of Sasanian power, to Rai, that is the place of origin of the Mihran family. Furthermore, and more interestingly, he reveals to the Sasanian king that his mission is going to take place 500 years after the enthronement of the first Sasanian king Ardashir. The words of the rebel general, convey not only the goal to restore a new legitimate dynasty, but also a cosmological order that Khosrow II broke through the regicide, as argued by Richard Payne. Moreover, the reference to the 500 years probably refers to the end of the millennium of Zoroaster, which would have caused many troubles and much harm to Iran-Shar and the Sasanian family. In fact, as Masudi reports, King Ardashir, estimating that it was nearing the end of the millennium of Zoroaster, and fearing that this harbored major troubles, sought to move back this term by shortening the Arsacid era by 2 centuries. In this way, the young Sasanian dynasty may have been strengthened by removing the social pressure of millenarian trends. This historical fraud, as Professor Gnoli called in some articles, both political and religious, welded the destiny of the crown to that of the religion clergy, Zoroastrian clergy, strengthened or built some apocalyptic imagination. Returning to Bahram Choben, some important remarks on the religious and mythical attributes of the king of Padishwargar and Kaiwaram should be made. In fact, in the account in Jamasnamag, 43, but also 41 and 50 in particular, and in Zandi Wahman Yaz 7, the Yazad Mir plays an important role. However, Jamasnamag places Mir in an apocalyptic and historical context as a sort of family patron who sends a messenger to support the king of Padishwargar and to promise him help. As Parvaneh Pourchariati argued, the Mihran family, and in particular Bahram Choben, were connected to the figure of Mithra. This argument fits well the account of the rebel general found in the Armenian history of Sebeos, 7th century, who reports Mer Wandak, the slave of Mir, as the nickname of Bahram Choben. Moreover, adherence to the Mitraic worship of a rebel general might be at the core of the attitude of Khosrow II, who during his flight from Eranshar to the Roman territories entrust his destiny to the creator, that is Ormazd, of course, while disregarding the false gods and dismissing any hopes in Mir, according to the record of the 7th century Byzantine historian Teophylact Simokat. This means that it would not be inaccurate to attribute these passages to the rebel general. In fact, different sources, such as Teophylact Simokata's History 4:12-37 and Shahnameh, seems to report how Bahram Choben attempted to be presented as the legitimate Iranian king, endowed with traditional legal and religious recognition, swearing firstly on Ormazd and then on the other gods, while asking for alliances, as in the episode with Armenian Sparabed, Mushel Mamikonian. Another passage that is worthy of further examination is that found in Zandi Wahman Yazd 8:1. And I would like, of course, to know what my colleagues think about it. It says that when Kai Wahram will arrive, he will appoint Wistahm as Mobedan Mobed, and he will grant Wistahm a true and relevant role in the strengthening of religion in Eranshar. Carlo Cereti correctly argued that some elements of the imaginary hero Wahram belong to the story of King Wahram Gor, whose dastur, according to the Shahnameh, for example, was called Gushtahm, Vishtahm in Middle Persian. While agreeing with the origin of the narrative motive, I would like to suggest prudently that perhaps this motive might have been adapted to the other famous rebel, Vistahm, belonging to the Arsacid family of Spahbat, who also rebelled against Khosrow II. In fact, in 591, after Vistahm and his brother Windo helped Khosrow II in his successful struggle against Bahram Choben, Khosrow II ordered the murder of Windoe and caused Vistahm to flee to the northeastern Sasanian territories. This rebellion, which lasted at least 7 years, much more than the rebellion of Bahram Choben, involved large areas of Adurbadagan, Azerbaijan, modern Azerbaijan, let's say, more or less, Padishwargar, modern Tabaristan, and Khurasan. According to Sebeos, Vistahm fought with his army against the troops of Khosrow II in Rai, the place of origin of Bahram Choben families, and later he reached the more secure Caspian region of Gilan. Meanwhile, Tabaristan and other neighboring regions rebelled against Khosrow II, probably incited by Vistahm's propaganda. The 9th century historian Dinawari reports that Vistahm met and joined the supporters of Bahram Choben in the Caspian region of Dailam. Furthermore, Nawari relates that Mardan Sina, chief of Bahram's forces, invited Vistahm to fight for the crown by virtue of his ancestors, such as the mythical Iranian king Wahman Spandiadan. Moreover, he says that Vistahm answered the letter from Khosrow II, who demanded his surrender, using the same themes of the anti-Sasanian propaganda based on the humble origins of Sasan. These topics were also used by Bahram Choben in the Shahnameh. I suspect that this longer second rebellion of Vistach, which was considered a sort of continuation of that of Bahram Choben, has been recorded through a cryptic narrative typical of apocalyptic literature that aims to sketch the event and or the protagonist instead of clearly unveiling them. For this reason, though Vistach was not in any way a priest on an apocalyptic, timeless stage, the Alliance's Zoroastrian model king priesthood, found in Zandi Wachman 8.1, might have been represented by the welding of the shared political mission of Bahram Choben and Vistach. The events of the end of the 6th century caused a series of social, political, and military disturbances that likely turned to some extent on apocalyptic dynamics. Though one should not overstate the significance or scope of the rebellion of Bahram Choben, some kind of propaganda probably emerged to justify and amplify his deeds. A Bahram Choben Nameh, of which the Pahlavi must have been written between 590-591, as argued by Bonner, circulated also after the Sasanian period, according to Masudi and according to the theorist of Al-Nadim, and was used as a historical source by Dinawari and the following authors. It is probable that a Sasanian counter-propaganda campaign aimed to highlight the terrible deeds of Bahram Choben, the evil and insignificant man in all the apocalyptic Pahlavi text, who somehow caused the rebellion of Vistach, whose revolt constituted a great embarrassment in the Sasanian circles. Sasanian propaganda against Bahram Choben was probably already extant at the very beginning of his rebellion. In fact, Theophilat Simocatta reports that Khosrow II wrote to Maurice about how the treachery of this abominable general had caused confusion in the Persian Empire and the strengthening of malicious tribes. In this letter, Khosrow II also refers, with apocalyptic flavor, as suggested by Professor Andrea Piras in the last issue of the Journal of Persian Studies, to some unspecified demons who attacked the Sasanian state and caused several social and political calamities. Perhaps, that's just a question I'm asking recently, were they the same demons with parted hair and of the seed of Cheshm who appear in the Zandi Bahman Yazd 329, just after the era of Khosrow I, as Piras has argued? And were they later associated with the black army of Abu Muslim, as it appears in Zandi Bahman 424? If so, there would be further evidence of the pre-Islamic formation of several apocalyptic motifs in Iran. The different perception, negative and positive, of the figure of Bahram Choben might account for the presence of overlapping, misplaced, and conflicting narrative elements in the 9th-10th century tradition, when the original narrative was already confused and perhaps even unknown. As said, the first decades of the 7th century carried many apocalyptic expectations in all the main religious communities and marked the rise of several prophecies in Christian, Jewish, and then Muslim milieus. The conquest of Jerusalem and Egypt by Khosrow II, the ensuing reaction of the Emperor Heraclius, the last Persian-Roman War, and finally the coming of the Muslim army, were considered as signs of the end of the world. It is in this historical momentum that one can find another eligible period for the spark of Iranian apocalyptic literature, which seems to share common narrative motives and figures with neighboring religious communities. The first narrative motive we will discuss is the Christian figure of the last emperor, the ultimate Greek-Roman ruler who will consign his power to God after his victory over all the evil enemy forces on earth in the last days of the world. This tradition, which already belonged to the late 4th century text Tiburtine Sibyl, was extremely popular in the 7th century Christian apocalyptic Syriac literature, such as the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius and the Syriac Alexander legend, and also, in some way, in the equivalent Jewish tradition represented by the Sefer Elijah and Sefer Zerubbabel. Schumacher has recently argued that the narrative figure of the last emperor was also borrowed from the Iranian apocalyptic narrative. He argued that the above-mentioned Zoroastrian text refers to the messianic reign of Wakram Choben, largely following the argument of Zegledi. However, if one takes into consideration the Jewish and Christian sources, I started very recently to do it, as I told you, because of the pandemic, this narrative motive was already popular in the period between the Reconquista of Jerusalem by Heraclius in 628 and the fall of the Sasanian Empire to the Arabs in 651. Furthermore, in the Iranian apocalyptic, there are other narrative motives, such as the list of calamities following the Arab conquest and the idea of the triad of enemies, which seems to be borrowed from the aforementioned Syriac Christian text, but it's just so far a question, more a doubt. In the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius, for example, it is quite striking to read that when the sons of Ishmael, that is the Arabs, destroy Persia and some areas of the Byzantine Empire, they will cause, among other things, the mockery of the wise and the knowledgeable men. This is of course the Middle Persian text, and in bold you can say something. You can see something we can relate to the topic in the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius. They will cause, among other things, the mockery of the wise and the knowledgeable men, the promotion of the villain and the deposing of the great, the sale of the daughter by the mother, and the blossoming of slanders and false speech and writing. These forecasts are also found in the Jamas Namag, as you can see, and in a more detailed way in the Zani Wahman Yazd. Another shared narrative I'm now investigating might be the stereotyped model of the triptych of apocalyptic enemies. In the Pahlavi sources, it is represented by the Romans, Turks, and Arabs that will together devastate, Arabs Tazigand, of course, that they will devastate Iran-Shar with approaching of the end of millennium of Zoroaster, before the final victory of Khaywarram, the king of Badishwargar, as we see in Jamas Namak. This is comparable, maybe, to the account in the Syriac legend of Alexander, where Alexander the Great defeats the league of Huns, Persian, and Arabs, who are called, as we know, Ta'ids, as in the Middle Persian Tazigan, before handing back his crown to God. Continuing with the comparative approach to apocalyptic personalities, it is interesting to note that the son of Ishmael in Apocalypse of the Pseudo-Methodius will arrive and desolate the world at the beginning of the 7th millennium, just as the parted earth demons will arrive during the 7th and last era of the millennium of Zoroaster. Now, here, of course, there is a lot to say about. So, if one posits that the Zoroastrian apocalyptic narrative borrowed, this is my idea that I would like, of course, to strengthen, to make clear, more secure. if one posits that the Zoroastrian apocalyptic narrative borrowed from a 7th century contemporary model, and that the conquest of Arabs is one of the many terminus ante quem of the reworking of these accounts, one can also reassert the well-known identification of Kai Wahram, the king of Padish Wargar, with Wahram, one of the sons of the last king Yazdegerd III, according to Masudi. If so, his story would reflect the historical deeds attributed to his elder brother Peroz, who looked from the Sogdians and Heptalite princes into Karistan against the Arabs. Peroz's army was stationed at Zaranj, located on the border between modern-day Afghanistan and Iran, between 658 and 663, where Peroz established a Persian area command under the protection of the Tang emperor. When the Chinese emperor fell short of the expectation of Sasanian to regain their kingdom, except to recognize a fictive king of Persia, Peroz retreated to the Chinese court in 674-75, where his brother Wahram probably also continued to sojourn. China continued to recognize the fictive existence of a king of Persia at least until the middle of the 8th century. The geographical areas that characterize the account of Peroz are the same regions found in Kai Wahram's story. In fact, Kai Wahram, endowed with the legitimate royal attributes of Quarra, after rallying an army in China and in India, will come from the region of Kabulistan, the modern Afghanistan, or from Zavulistan, to be located also in the modern Afghanistan, to Iranshar. Now, of course, apocalyptic texts let us a lot of options of identification. I would like to spoiler something, the idea that I would like, together with my dear colleague Hudadad Rezakhani, to work also on the figures of Khurshid Windad Hormizd from 7th century, from 8th century, who were living, let's say, in Tabaristan. That is something new, but we are just started to think what to do together. At any rate, given the broad apocalyptic feeling that traversed the Byzantine Empire, the former Sasanian ones, these accounts could belong to the Sasanian political propaganda that heralded the return of the legitimate king from the lands east and southeast of Iran in the very first decades of the Arab conquest. Nevertheless, the rise of the illegitimate king Wahram Choben might have been seen as the upheaval of the divine order of the world, in which the legitimate Sasanian kingship plays a very important role in Iranian and in particular Zoroastrian cosmology. It then could have been a relevant trigger for the spreading of apocalyptic ideas. However, this in no way excludes the established fact that Zoroastrian rework and adapt the apocalyptic narrative model till the 11th even 12th centuries as to prophecies respectively in the memorial of Jamasp 1528 and Bundaizn 36-910 show, whenever they felt an imminent danger and believed in the potential of a benign figure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Agostini, and we have plenty of time for discussion. Are there any questions? Professor Strubza.
Thank you, Nico, so much for this very elaborate presentation of eschatology under the Sasanians. My question is the following. Would you care to develop about the possible interplay between Zoroastrian apocalyptics and the the rise of Jewish and Christian apocalyptics in the 6th and 7th century, which of course is connected to the emergence of Islam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, yes. And I was talking before with some friends about the fact that I got funds from Israeli Science Foundation for my project on Iranian apocalypse few months before the rise of coronavirus. But this is part of my project, the idea, and this is very relevant. I have an idea, probably I'm not right, that there existed a kind of narrative model, maybe from some Christian text, Jewish text, that after that it was elaborated in other traditions, like the Zoroastrian tradition. A student of mine is working now, is writing a MA thesis. I told him to be very prudent on some apocalyptic, on the Sefer Zerubbabel and the Sefer Elijah, in comparison to the Zandi Wahman Yazn. There are some elements that he's working on, and it's very interesting, I think. It's a good direction, I think. Sometimes I was not surprised, but at the beginning I was surprised to see so many similarities between, I don't know, Pseudo-Methodius and some Zoroastrian texts. And nobody so far really explored this connection, interaction, I don't know what. Of course, yes, this is what I would like to do. I got one supplementary here for my research, hopefully I will do. But I had also in my mind to work on some early Islamic text, but I won't be able to do it probably at least next year.
May I continue?
Yeah.
The question is whether, I want to push you a little bit more. Shaked, more than anyone else, not more than one else, but he was one of the leading scholars calling attention to the very early impact of Iranian religious traditions on Judaism, from the Bible, certainly Qumran, and so on. My question now is whether you think that similarities or parallelism between Judeo-Christian apocalyptics, including Manichaean and Gnostic apocalypse, if you want, and the Zoroastrian tradition is mainly influenced, reflects a very early influence on the side of Iran, or more something contemporary, the contemporary interplay between Jews and Christians and Zoroastrians in Mesopotamia.
Yeah, about Qumran, I think Shaul was very clear, but I wrote an article a few years ago on Iranian and Jewish apocalyptic, again. It was a bit ironic because, many scholars tried really to identify earlier connection between this text. For example, when in the Zandi Wahman Yazn, there is the representation that is a 9th century text, at least it was written, but who knows if there was an earlier composition. We have the big problem about the rise of written literature in Iran. There was something called in Sasanian time. I don't want to enter this discussion here, of course. And in my article, I think I try to prove that sometime Zoroastrians were aware about the description of the metallic statue of Daniel, for example. Now, in the Zandi Wahman Yazn, we don't have a statue. We have two versions of the same story about a metallic tree with 4 branches and 7 branches. This is a kind of probably related to some kind of numerology in Iran. 7 is an important number as well as 4. But sometimes I try to understand if this passage, the passage of this idea, was something that happened really in late antiquity or even before, because we know that also in late antiquity, many Christian authors, they use again the model of Daniel. Sometimes it's very difficult to say. We don't have, I think, a smoking gun, but the fact that Iranian ideas, Jewish ideas circulated, of course, before late antiquity, probably it's sure. I would be very prudent to try to, but you know, there is now probably I will forget the name of this author, and I forgot this Christian author who wrote about Daniel. He was from Zoroastrian and Iranian origin. Now I completely forgot, but I will tell you later. I will check. And
Professor Friedman?
I have an observation
Yeah.
and a question. The observation is about one of your texts in which an army comes from Khorasan and carries black armor.
yeah,
This is a standard tradition in the Islamic apocalyptics. There are not black armors, but black flags.
yeah,
But, and you know, this has become famous even in our times, the black flags.
yeah.
The question is whether after these apocalyptic battles, what happens after them? Is there an end of days or just a righteous kingdom on earth?
Thank you very much. This text relating and describing the end of the millennium of Zarathustra is the end of the millennium 10th. It means 10. It means that we are far from the end of the world according to the Zoroastrian tradition that is based on 12 millennia. What we have in this particular text, the text I wrote, is the description of the end of the millennium of Zarathustra. What they are waiting for, of course, is a savior. Is a savior, a human savior, someone, of course, who is sent by God to save Eranshar. Now, if we think from a political perspective, we can imagine that there was in that time some hopes about some kind of political, human Messiah that can be a king coming back to Eranshar and free the land from you know.
There will be another millennium.
There is other 2 millennia, and there are texts, of course, the Bundaizhne, for example, other Zoroastrian texts, Middle Persian Zoroastrian texts, describing the end of the 12 millennia. This is also in the Bundaizhne, we have many. But this is what is interesting. These texts, at least what I read, they are not heralding the end of the world, at the final coming of God and the resurrection, the renovation of the world. They are precisely talking about the end of this millennium, the millennium of Zarathustra, Zoroaster.
Well, I don't want to complicate matters any further, but there is also an ancient Greek apocalyptic or the archaic period, something like 6th century ABC. So it's and Persian influence is not excluded, but but it's pseudo-Hesiod, but it's another source.
Recently, I think Cosmin he talked about this text.
Okay. So
I have a question for you.
please.
Is there a voice, besides this world of neurotics, is there a voice of sanity addressing the same issues at the same time?
Sorry, of?
Is there another body of literature that represents a different reading of the same types of historical and social events? And because I'm thinking of this in terms of, we have on the one hand people at Qumran, and then there's a whole other world that exists outside of Quran that doesn't share such ideas.
Yeah.
So this is say the equivalent of the Qumran world. Is there another world with which these people have to be interacting and speaking about?
Of course. Let's think about the Zoroastrian community after the conquest of Iran. They lose their authority, they lose their probably not religious freedom, but they are not anymore a majority. When they write this kind of text, of course, they are writing in a specific historical milieu. It means that, of course, that this is a push. The fact that they have to interact with the new world coming to their own lands. It means that the change, of course, of their world, it helped the birth of this kind of the literature. But we don't have really another world. This text, Zoroastrian text, they are there, of course. There are many other traditions talking about the same events, but of course from another perspective. For example, in Zoroastrian tradition, we don't have apocalyptic text referring in a specific way to the conquest, the Persian conquest of Jerusalem, that we find in the late antique Jewish apocalypse of Christian, late antique Christian apocalypse. Even though I found, I think, some memory in Middle Persian, in two passages in Middle Persian, Menogikrat and Denkar V, they are talking about Jerusalem and the conquest of Jerusalem by a traditional Iranian hero, but this is something else, actually. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Domenico, for a very interesting paper. I just wanted to ask about a specific expression which is found in several texts. You quoted also here, the deaths with parted hair.
Yes.
What is it?
Two options.
Okay.
Let's say, I think Professor Grenet thought that there is a reference there to the Khurasanian army. And in an article where he tried to investigate and he described this chapter 16 of Ayadagari Jamaspir Jamas Namak, usually we used to say that they are Turks. Okay?
Yes.
But, of course, the Scandinavian school thought that they were kind of Mannerbund, I think, these young warriors, okay, that were against Zarathustra, okay. But Turks, I think, is okay. Khurasanian army, I think it's a great suggestion from Professor Grenet. And there are also some antiquists thinking that they were kind of circle of young warriors fighting against Zarathustra.
Okay, thank you so much. So the Turks with their braided long hair immediately came to my mind about that. So thank you very much for clarifications.